Good morning, Fred. How are you?
Good morning, Anil. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, mate. So we were chatting over the last couple days, and we came up with an idea to discuss our relationship with money. And this is something that came from you. And I think I want to kind of probe this a bit more and ask you a few questions around it. And I think you got some real interesting nuggets that you can share with us on it.
Let's hope so.
I promise you, I find it interesting already. So if others don't, well, hey,
Yeah, yeah.
switch off now if you don't find it interesting.
Mhm.
No. Um, hey, so Fred, relationship with money.
hmm
Talk to me about it. What
Yeah.
comes to mind?
Yeah. Well, so I think we have an emotional relationship with money in several ways that, it causes emotion, it causes a reaction. Anything from, I don't know about you, but the number of times in my life that I've talked about how a bill should be split and how someone was suggesting a bill was split in a very odd way that said something about them, uh, and how it varies from country to country, and tipping. So, I mean, just in a restaurant setting, there are a lot of interesting perspectives on money, uh, where, if someone says, let me pick this one up, you're like, oh, that's nice. And then if someone says, let me pick this one up because, I have a lot more money than you do, it's not so nice anymore, right?
No, no, it's not.
Uh, and yeah, those kind of things. With tipping as well, that I've been reading about, some restaurateurs in the US over the last few years have run some experiments to not have tipping, but to have a fixed service fee.
Mhm.
And some people are really against that. When they're eating there, it really gets to them that they want to tip. And of course, tipping is important if the waiter doesn't have a salary. But then if you look at it, and like, waiters who look a certain way get more tips than others, and what does it mean if, someone is dependent on the tip, and actually the food is not good and they're doing a great job, and maybe it's not a great feedback mechanism. And it seemed like in this setting, some people wanted to use a tip as a way to get like the upper hand, in some kind of power dynamic. Um, and I think all those things are, yeah, just worth thinking about. And it makes me think about how we use money in other contexts, and the relationship with money, and how we feel about sending invoices,
Mhm.
how we feel about getting a service. I have a lot of friends who do like, breath work and massage and other therapeutic modalities. And it's like, if you do it for a friend, maybe you say, no, you don't have to pay me. And it seems like a nice, generous thing to do. And then they think like, oh, but that massage really was really good, I want to come back. But now I feel like I can't because I didn't pay for the first one. And then if I ask, like, as a customer, I want to come back, then they cannot be doing this for free for me forever. So maybe that type of generosity is a little bit unsustainable, or creates a little bit imbalance. And the receiver would actually feel better if there was a way for them to restore the balance, and to ask for, a further exchange of services, let's say.
I'm going to pause you there.
Mm.
So, what I love about this is so something you mentioned to me is the concept of indebtedness for a service. And so you kind of gave almost three examples there, and I think they all link. So one is, let's say we went out to dinner, you treat me to dinner. If I feel like, oh, he makes more than me, I'm going to feel a bit indebted
Mm.
to you for that treat. Or we tip the waitress or waiter for the meal, um, but like that's already included in the cost of the meal, the actual plate. So it's almost like, wait, are we tipping more than we need to for that service? uh, or like you said, if a friend offers you something for free, a massage, breathing exercise, and you don't pay, and you want to then do it again, you almost feel like, oh wait, am I indebted to that person? And it's interesting how like money, almost kind of that relationship creates a bit of a hierarchy, maybe intentional or
Mm.
unintentional.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And then that imbalance,
Mm.
because of that hierarchy, that stems from that relationship with money and our relationship with friends or strangers, even, or service providers, it suddenly starts to kind of just make things a bit murky. And so
Yeah,
you
yeah.
feel
I
uneasy.
think that's interesting. For me, like the hierarchy and the imbalance are two separate phenomena, right? Some people try to basically, uh, get like impose a permanent hierarchy by using money. And I mean, I have examples from before when I had my own company, and and you meet someone and they say, "Oh, you run this business." Yeah, I might invest in that, and they're really trying to impose themselves in a certain position.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that they're trying to do. Like it sounds more ego driven, that this is how they use money and that the wealth makes them better than other people. And in the relationship, they're the ones who pay, and other people are the ones who do as they're told. There's permanent a master servant dynamic between the person who pays and the person who serves something, let's say. um, which I think that like often tastes bad or is off-putting, or something like that. Whereas the imbalance can be a little bit, you just have to think about it, because between two friends, maybe it's good to keep that balance, um, to find a way to not make the other people feel indebted, or that they couldn't ask for this favor again because it's what you do for a job, and that kind of thing.
No, I agree with that. I think it's like that hierarchy, that imposition of oneself over another, um, can obviously be uncomfortable and almost change a dynamic, not only between your relationship with money, but your relationship with that other person.
Mm-hmm.
And then the imbalance that can also result, it's almost like, the value that one person places on it versus another.
Mm-hmm.
um, let's go a bit further into that. So, Fred, kind of going back to your example of, friends offering, like, let's say, a service to another friend, to kind of tell me a bit more about that. Like, what's been your experience with that, where that relationship between two people, and then that relationship with money can maybe lead towards, this imbalance, or this
Mm-hmm.
imposition.
Yeah, yeah. um, well, I was thinking about it just because I have a very generous friend, in terms of doing this kind of service and promoting something, let's say like a massage. And then she went to someone else for another type of treatment, and she came back and she said, oh, it was amazing, and it's so good, and I felt so good afterwards, and we're kind of friendly, so she didn't allow me to pay, and now I don't know, I don't feel good about asking for it again. So the generosity uh, is something that it's like the opposite of a transactional relationship. A transactional relationship sounds a little bit, you know, cheaper, a little bit more superficial. And, among friends, we want to be generous. But then it can generate a feeling. And, I don't think it's wrong that we want to maintain some kind of balance between giving and taking. That's also in a good relationship where you want to see yourself as generous and as giving something. But after a while, you might say, like, hey, I'm not getting anything back here. And I think that applies financially as well, that the money is just a part of this relationship. It's one of the forms of energy that flows. It's one of the processes. So then I'm thinking about it more as energy or process, that we think about a lot of things as objects,
Mhm.
like water in a bucket, or a river as an object. But in fact, a river is not an object. It's water flowing and the banks move, and it's a process. And a cloud is a process, and a wave is a process. A wave is not a thing, right? It's a movement.
Mhm.
um, and it's a little bit similar. If you think about it as a process and as a flow, then you realize that you want the good flow to be maintained.
So, just on that, so maybe the way I interpret that is, you know, we don't want to take advantage of that generosity.
Hmm.
So, like, the money almost just creates a bit of a balance between, hey, look, I provide a service, you pay me for it, and
Hmm.
their balance is restored.
Hmm.
But I think, but how how do we overcome it, Fred? Just in your
Hmm.
perspective, so I think, like you mentioned, there's this give and take. How do you restore the balance of the flow? Is it by payment? Is it by conversation? How do you restore that flow?
Um, I like the idea of talking about it. Just saying like I would like this to be an ongoing thing, and for it to be an ongoing thing, and for me to feel good about it, there has to be some, you know, sustainability of this value exchange. And you can come up with some uh, barter arrangement, or someone might say like, look, I just started doing this, I really need to experiment and learn, so if you just give me the feedback about how it's going, I'll be happy to do it. You know, if someone is like doing a massage training or something like that, right? And you say, okay, yeah, then it's fine, let's do it. um, to get this thing out of the head and onto the table, and to then maybe go a little bit further to say, yeah, you're right. You know, this is not going to be sustainable. And if I have the opportunity to provide my service for someone who pays and someone who doesn't pay, I'm going to have to go with the person who pays because I need to pay my rent. And so you find a way where, yeah, some kind of balance is maintained, and where both people feel good about the ongoing exchange.
So it's almost, I love it. Go back to the chat we had, I think, a few weeks back. Like, it's stating that intention up front.
Hmm. Yeah.
Almost, hey, this is actually, I'm gifting this to you because I'm starting out and I'd love to know what you think. And if you like it, we can talk about how we sustain it. If you don't like it, hey, give me the feedback. That's payment enough, no harm, no foul, and we move on. It's almost like having that conversation up front, almost to keep the balance, you know, restore the balance up front so that it doesn't become imbalanced after the
Yeah.
activity or
Yeah.
after.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, and it makes sense in that, like, obviously we've come from, over the last 1,000 years, obviously we've come into the system of, payment in order to eliminate that discomfort. But I think, irrespective, when it comes to friends, sometimes that indebtedness, that imbalance can occur. And I think it's just, yeah, like you said, just restore it with a clear intention up front.
Hmm.
Fred, the going back to your point on flow, something that you mentioned to me as well is that flow of money, and you kind of gave me the analogy of
Hmm.
like the water between buckets.
Hmm.
Maybe continue with that theme of flow, and how do you see that play into this dynamic as well?
Yeah, so I was thinking about the scenario of like inheriting money, which seems to be problematic in a number of cases. And then it's really something. And then you brought up the example of athletes and lottery winners. And I think it's a good example of like all of a sudden you just got a big bucket, but you don't have the machinery set up to catch that and for that to flow and for you to understand how your machine works, or how the water flows between the buckets, or whatever the analogy is. And then it causes some problems. And you see, you know, if this machine is built up over a long period of time, you get used to all the parts. And you might think at one point, like in this case, when I paid for this, it actually didn't feel good. It felt like I was creating this hierarchy, and my ego was getting a boost, but my relationships got worse, or something like that, right? Um, and if it happens all at once, it can be too much, and then you don't have that sense. You've not developed the emotional responses and, ego responses to all the ways that money can flow in your life. And athletes and artists struggle with money. People who inherit money, I think there tends to be in a number of cases problems there. And yeah, the lottery winners, there's some statistics on as well, right? How many of them go bankrupt?
No, indeed, but I find it, so if I ever won the lottery, and I've thought about
Mhm.
this, like if I ever
Mhm.
came into money, I'd immediately want to pay off my parents, like, their mortgage,
Right.
pay off my sister's mortgage. I would want, it's almost like I want to pay off all this debt so I can be
Mhm.
debt free. And like, okay, that's clear. But at the same time, there's almost like this, wait, why are you paying off your parent? Like, do you feel indebted to your parents that you need to
Mhm.
pay their mortgage? You need to buy them a car. You need to, it's almost like you start seeing people gift, oh, but you were there for me, so here's this watch, or you were there for me, so
Mm,
here's this. And I find that like, kind of funny. It's like
it is, yeah.
suddenly that this money becomes this source of, uh, yeah, like let me pay you back for something that you gave me or did for me years ago.
Yeah. Which can be, if you feel so. I think it's a really interesting thought experiment. Like, what would you do if you got a certain amount of money?
Yeah.
It's a common question in terms of to get at, like, are you happy with your job, for example, or
Mhm.
how quickly would you quit if you had a certain amount of money? And some people say, no, I would just stick with it. And I think often that's a very good idea in terms of like not changing too much or finding a job that you like, because the idle life can be very difficult, but it can also be nice to make certain dreams come true. And if that's really important, it's worth going for. Helping our parents is a nice gesture, and most cases they've done a lot for us. um, and in some cases, similar to the inheritance, if parents pay for things, they also may or may not expect things in return. When someone pays, they expect you to do things, um, for that in a way. Or even if I think some parents make their children feel guilty about like everything we've done for you, and the children, you know understandably want to get out of that feeling of guilt. And of course, I mean, paying off someone's mortgage is just a very nice thing to do. So it might, I don't want to over problematize it. uh, but yeah, and I think that also says we have a certain relationship with debt, right? And there's something, for example, in Sweden they talk about like rich people are happier to take on student debt, and they say that's actually a good investment. You take the student loan, you go to university, and you make more money and get a better job, and then you pay it back, and it's not a problem at all. Whereas apparently a lot of working class children are know learn that not taking any debt is financial responsibility, and for that reason they choose not to go to university. That's a story I've heard in terms of making student loans are not enough to make higher education equitably accessible. So I think that's interesting, because then it's about the attitude to debt, and it tells you a lot about what's going on, and what you do. Maybe the attitude is right, or maybe it's like this overly negative attitude towards debt actually says something about, I don't know, how I grew up and what I learned, and yeah, maybe it should be reassessed.
It's just funny to me how, to be in debt, whether it's to be in financial debt or in debt to a friend, or, you know, money is almost seen as a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's right or wrong, we can debate that till prior faces turn blue.
Mm.
Uh, I find that, money does enable access, and it does enable reward, and it does offset risk. You go back to your earlier example
For sure.
about being an entrepreneur, and like you start a business, and, or you hire someone, I tell people these days, like, I'm like, your salary at the end of the day will cover your day-to-day expenses, but it's not going to create wealth for you unless you do something with it. Or if you get equity in a business, suddenly now you've got skin in the game, and you have something that you don't feel indebted, because you're kind of like, look, I'm in this. And if
Sure.
it doesn't work out, okay, but if it does work out, I have an upside.
Mm.
And I just find that dynamic with feeling like, money can, in a good ego, good money can actually, you know, help. It can actually
For sure. For sure.
remove that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that negative
Mm.
sensation of being
Yeah.
in debt.
So there's a stigma both with debt and with money in general, right?
Yeah,
That money is
exactly.
something dirty or bad, which, yeah, I think that can create some basically incorrect ideas about money. Whether we like it or not, it's a very powerful concept that's basically universally accepted, and that makes it true, right? It's a contingent truth based on our belief, and to have such a universal, medium of exchange and store of value and blah blah blah, these things we talk about that we use money for, it just makes it incredibly powerful, right? Your rent, your food, your holidays, everything is kind of paid for by that, and everything is part of that flow, whether it's work, savings, investments, enable us to do all these things. enable us to help other people, and can create so much good.
No, but we go back to your example then of like, when you come into money, if you don't know how to manage this flow, you could actually create more headaches for yourself and actually bring the stigma to life that money can be a problem,
Mm,
debt
yeah.
can be a problem.
Hmm.
If you don't have a mechanism set up to really understand that flow of, my bucket is now full of more water. I want to, put it from this bucket to that bucket. And that flow is actually the right flow of it. And
Hmm.
it'll actually create value as
Hmm.
opposed to an imbalance. It'll actually remove a hierarchy as opposed to creating one. So it's almost
Hmm.
like, how do we offset? And that's, I really like what you said, is like, if you're not prepared to even see it as a flow and have the right mechanism to enable that flow, you're just going to create headaches for yourself
Hmm.
in any dynamic, in any situation where
Yeah,
money and
exactly.
or services are involved.
And what you said made me think about, like, sometimes people can be in such a powerful position that they're able to kind of extract more money than is good for the overall system, right? We talk about like rent seeking behavior, or corruption or something like that, where someone is basically almost literally just in a position to stand in the middle of a certain flow, and everyone else looking at the system is like, you're not doing anything of value here, there's no bucket, there's no wheel turning, you're just standing there, putting your bucket in the way, and ruining the flow in the whole system.
And why is that? Like, what is that? Just is that greed? Is that stupidity? Is it ignorant? Like, what would you? I mean, why? Because obviously, like
Yeah,
we
yeah.
always say, keep it simple. Why would
Hmm.
people do that? Like,
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
the?
yeah. Um, I think it is individualistic, short-sighted kind of greed that comes from some unfortunate, priorities throughout life. Like, I think that there's a big debate now, right, between these rich elites, and to some extent, you could say like, yeah, they're just there's nothing wrong with running a company. There's nothing wrong with owning shares and s- s- something like that. Um, but if you're in a position to put a lot of pressure on wages, and if you see, there's some argument like, the middle class in America is getting smaller, and that makes it a less dynamic system. It makes it a less sustainable economy, and too much wealth is just gathered at the top and not benefiting the daily lives of the population. Eventually, that could become a problem for the rich people as well, right?
Mhm, mhm.
That they they have to live in this society at the end, and then it's a less prosperous society, and then that affects business as well. Like, usually Henry Ford is brought up as a counterexample, right? Where he said something like, the people who work for Ford should be able to afford a Ford, or something like that, right?
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
some idea of like, if you pay people a little bit more, your local economy actually gets more dynamic, and maybe it attracts more people, and people start other businesses, and that there is a healthy, sustainable growth in that.
No, I mean, I do feel that again, it goes back to, the incentive. I've seen, companies, sorry, investors that are willing to invest more into business if they know they're going to relocate the headquarters to their city
Hmm.
because that's going to create jobs. And by creating more jobs, you're, like you said, you're pumping money back into the economy and vice versa. And you just create that harmony, that
Hmm.
balance that we were talking about earlier. And so, that relationship with money, it can have positive effects, but then it can drive your agenda, for purpose of good, or it can drive it to a purpose of greed.
Yeah,
um,
yeah. I
um,
think there's an interesting parallel there for companies as well. Like, some people talk about like good profits and bad profits, right? So, for example, there's the case of Harley Davidson. As one At one point they were really struggling, and then the motorcycles were just not that good. I don't remember if this was like in the 80s. I think it was owned by AMC, and they didn't care about motorcycles or something like that. And but some people really love them, so they actually charged more for a worse product, but of course the brand suffered,
mhm,
and it's unsustainable. And I think you could argue that those were bad profits, that
mhm.
that was not a sustainable way to do it. But then, lowering the price and creating a good motorcycle and making it a popular, trusted brand again, then those profits are good profits.
No, it's interesting. Again, it comes back to like how it can be perceived as good or bad.
Mm.
Um, and I it's funny for me because I always think of like good profits at the cost of bad profits at the cost of. So,
Mm.
good profits come at the benefit of something, how you
Hmm.
treat your people, how you treat your brand, how you treat your customers, how you retain them, how do you
Yeah.
create value and add value versus bad profits is when you're trying to slash costs, let go of people, restructure in a way that makes you, yeah, more efficient,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
maybe less effective because
Hmm.
you're actually doing it at the cost of something. So I think it goes back to, again, is your relationship with money driven by creating value
Hmm.
and doing something for good,
Yeah.
or are you doing it at the cost of something and therefore doing it that's going to lead to something bad?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It like
Uh,
creates a hole in the future, a little gap that
yeah,
that
well, it goes back to that imbalance, right? Like,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
hierarchy. Like we're basically, it's almost like you're starting to put things in, you're putting in barriers. So
Mm.
you go back to the simple example of if I bought you lunch, cool, hey, appreciate it, thank you.
Yeah.
Following week, hey, you treated me, I'm going to treat you today, cool, awesome, brilliant. There's a clear flow, there's a
Hmm.
clear mechanic, there's a clear understanding. If I win the lottery and I go, hey, Fred, I got this.
Hmm.
And the following week, hey, Fred, I got this. Week after, Fred, hey, I got this.
Hmm.
After a while, you're going to be kind of like, okay, I can treat you too. Like, why do you suddenly feel like you're at a different place where you feel the need to
Exactly.
treat me, and
Hmm.
it comes at a cost of maybe our friendship or of our ability to feel like not equals, but just feel like we're brothers or like we're friends. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
starts to just
Yeah.
create a bit of a disparity when it's not necessary.
No. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting dynamic, and there goes a lot into it in terms of how it can build a relationship, or how it can impact a relationship, or it can signal something about the power dynamic or the value someone is getting out of it. For example, if someone says like, "I wanted to ask you something about the sportswear industry," and
Yeah,
then we go for lunch, then it's understood that I will pay for the lunch, right?
exactly.
Because
It's like,
I
hey,
asked, and I asked for a specific reason, and then right.
but one that this is, it's been eating at me, and I'm going to throw it out there, and I hope
Mm-hmm.
it's not a grenade, but it's like, you go on a date,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah, yeah, it's a
and
good one. Yeah.
one pays for the other,
Hmm.
and it's almost like this. Okay, and I always have this debate with friends because I'm the guy that I used to always pay on the first date. So if it's
Hmm.
100 pounds, 200 pounds, and my friends were like, "Dude, what's wrong with you? Split it on the first date. Go Dutch."
Okay.
No, no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah,
Like I've gotta do that because that's
yeah.
my thing, and and like, yeah, but you don't have to. So then the second date, I'll pay. The third date, I'll be like, all right, is she paying or is she not paying?
Yeah,
If
yeah.
she doesn't pay or offer to pay, I'm like, whoa, like suddenly you're now taking me for a ride. And it's this
Hmm.
weird, and this has always been like a center of conversation when you go on a date is who pays and why. And
Yes, yes.
is that what principles or values is that set up at the start? Go ahead, jump in.
I think that's a great example because we talked about it a little bit before, but not in that exact context. And of course, in that context, you do have the power dynamics between men and women, right?
Mhm.
Some people talk about the traditional values and chivalry or something like that, and some people talk about the gender equality. So it'd be interesting to think to hear a woman's opinion on that in terms of like if a guy buys 5 drinks, does that change anything?
Mhm.
Is there I mean, I'm going to assume there's an expectation on his side, that they're going to go on with the dating or something like that. But does it put the woman in a worse position
Put like
for
an
having accepted those gifts, right?
correct. Like
Uh,
there's this unspoken expectation now. Something
yeah.
I'm indebted to you, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
dude, I just go to the point where I used to buy a girl a drink as my opening line to chat with her. And I had friends again who were like, dude, stop
Yeah.
doing that. Like, you don't
Yeah.
need to buy her a drink. Let her buy her own
Exactly.
drink. You buy your
Mm-hmm.
drink. And maybe after the second or third, it's like, hey, now let me buy you a drink because I feel like where there's a rapport here, there's a balance here. The balance doesn't need to be created
Exactly.
from the
Yeah.
start.
Yeah.
Um,
It's very interesting how we do those things. I think we can learn a lot about ourselves
yeah.
of if we do that, and then we think, maybe I shouldn't buy a drink that quickly
Mhm.
because it sets up a certain dynamic where I don't know, maybe she actually just wants a drink and then just feels a bit obliged to talk to you, and it's not really good for anyone. And if similarly, it's nice to be treated to dinner, but if you get treated to dinner twice, three times, does it put you in an awkward position? Or maybe it says something as well about women who think that that's a good idea, and or people who think that that's a good idea and people who don't.
No, Fred, I'm actually kind of taking a couple of insights from this. So there are three that come to mind. The first is balance,
Mm-hmm.
and it's that balance, that flow, from A to
Mm-hmm.
B or A to B to C or A to B to C to D, like whoever's involved in the dynamic, making sure that you're finding balance. But in order to find the balance, the second thought, which is that intention, you're
Mm.
very clear up front with your intention,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not, you're trying to do it to create value for good as opposed to doing it for, as a repayment of any debt. And the third is, and this is funny, we talk about all the time, communication, just being open about it and like, hey, you got me last time, I'd like to get you this time. Or hey, you know what, because I invited you out, you've informed me, educated me, let me treat you to this coffee, to this drink, to this meal. I think it's just how we set ourselves up from the start, rather than letting, falling back to old habits, seeing it through and then realizing that we've created a hierarchy, we've created a sense of indebtedness, we've created a sense of imbalance and disparity that we just didn't need to, in the process of doing things with when it comes to money.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree. I think those are great points. And the fourth one I would add is there's something about money and power,
Mm.
where like money, power, and ego, where it's, I think, a valuable area for introspection, that we are actually setting up money dynamics that we like and that give us the things that we really need, um, and that are somehow good for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than, I guess we could do something like, for example, if you build something successful, to be proud of that is fine. If you pay people to tell you that you're the best in the world, that seems very hollow. And
Mm-hmm.
in both cases, you're using money kind of for your pride. But one is a sustainable, honest way, and the other one is a hollow and kind of fictional way.
I'm actually going to dive into that with you another time on as its own topic, because I feel like I just drew a triangle and I put like, dollar, power, ego. And then
Mm.
just think of it like, is that an equilateral triangle where it's like everything's in balance and it's all equal and therefore it's harmonious?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there an imbalance where money is feeding ego, which is feeding power, and that triangle is constantly, going in
Mm.
and out of
Yeah,
whack?
yeah. It can probably also be like a good, healthy, sustainable flow or something
Go
where,
from a
where, where,
triangle to a
where something
circle.
gets stuck in a particular place.
No, but but I think this is where I think it comes back maybe to people and how we perceive and what is it we're trying to fulfill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, and depending on what we're trying to fulfill, it's going to almost, I don't know if it's going to define our relationship with money
Mm-hmm.
or allow money to define our relationship or
Mm. Yeah,
relationship.
yeah. That's a good one.
Um, yeah. So I find this fascinating. Hey, Fred, any other thoughts, any closing thoughts from your side?
No, I actually liked your summary and my addition. Very happy with that.
Cool, man. Well, your addition leads us to a future conversation, which I look forward to already.
All right.
Um, but hey, Fred, as always, thanks again. Look forward to catching up with you soon, bud.
Let's do it. Speak
Sounds
soon.
good.
Ciao.
Take care, bud. Bye, everyone.